Good morning, everyone. We are live. It is Saturday. I'm joined here by Rich Hribar. I mean, man who needs no introduction. And thanks so much for coming on the show today. How was your week?
It's good, man. Week 2 was awesome. I'm glad that we're starting to get a little bit in the flow of the season. It's always a struggle early in the year to kind of find that workflow. And, as someone that spends a lot of time with data, only having a couple weeks, we need more. So it's been kind of a struggle trying to get like the streamlined process where the articles and stuff start to write themselves.
Right.
So we got a couple more weeks. We're going to get bye weeks in a couple weeks. Things get a little easier after that. I think week 8 is the only week without buys. That will kind of throw another wrench in things, especially someone that writes all 16 games up every week. I'll definitely be looking for those bye weeks and more data to be there just to help my process. But it's always good, man.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like you need those first couple weeks to make sure all the ducks are in a row, and then the thing starts to feed itself. And that kind of leads right into the question I wanted to open with, which is like, you said, you work closely with the data, you write up all 16 games. Like, how do you balance a 2-game sample versus what we thought going into the season, whether that's like projections or just assumptions about how a team would be? Because 2 games still feels like a pretty small sample. What's your sort of like weight on that?
Yeah, early in the season, I'm more or less just looking for things that are just starting to become like trends, right? Like what happened in week 1 that happened in week 2, things like that. And it's still just like you said, it's so small. Mostly looking at just like usage patterns for players. We're trying to get kind of the feel for, what roles actual players are in this offenses that they kind of determined they were going to be in. Because the preseason really didn't give us a lot of clarity, and especially with us losing a preseason game the last 2 years and week 1 being such a travesty. I don't know if that's directly related to the preseason, because the past week 1s, this year and last, were awful for fantasy football.
I've been thinking that too. It's like we really, and that just changes how we're going to be able to think about teams in week 4, right? Like, like I think week 1, I was thinking the same thing as those games were being played. It's like, this is just a preseason, but it counts toward the playoff records.
And I don't know how much of that, like I said, we can actually attribute. It's hard to quantify, like the players not playing. And is this why it's a slow start? Because last year, the entire season was a down scoring year. And so getting that immediate bounce back last week, where I think there was 22 more offensive touchdowns scored last week than there was in week 1. And seeing that immediate kind of bounce back was huge, like, because we didn't want to struggle for like 3 weeks and say like, all right, everyone's finding their footing. So seeing some teams kind of come back, and I think 13 games went over last week, which is always great, because that means a lot of fantasy points are scored. When the games are going over, we're getting fantasy points.
No, yeah, I mean there was some good. I mean that like Broncos Commanders game was nuts. The Giants come back, and
where were you Sunday? Which one did you see live?
So Sunday I was at the Bills Raiders game.
Okay.
So it was not the most exciting like football game, but the Bills looked really good and the Raiders looked really bad. But the Bills Mafia lived up to the hype too. So that was just a fun game to be at. The only game I've seen so far where every fan was in their seat right at kickoff. Like, you don't think about that during a football game, but the Bills fans, they're there, they're all rocking right at kickoff. And we're going to continue with a lot more with Rich Hribar here, but first, a quick word from the Podfather.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free, and one of our key missions is to make as much statistics and information and deep analysis available on PlayerProfiler.com for free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In package to continue to make all this possible. If you can't do All In, that's okay. We have a draft kit. Or you can just subscribe to the player rankings. Those now include tight end premium FFPC ranks, our brand new data analysis package will blow your hair back. And of course, there's our Dynasty Deluxe and our DFS Dominator. Take a moment, check out our premium services to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.
All right. And we're back here with Rich Hribar. as the Podfather said, make sure you guys are subscribed to PlayerProfiler. Like, we have all the best features out there, and if you want to win in DFS, in Dynasty, make sure you're subscribed to that. But Rich, again, thanks so much for coming on today's episode. I like to kind of just give people a backstory for sort of their favorite analysts. So do you want to start out by telling us, like, what was the first league you played in? Do you remember, like, when you got started with fantasy football?
I remember, being, I want to say around like 12 or 13 years old, not like a league, but I remember like I would print out like sheets, and it would have like the players like pick them and like take them around. And like all my friends, like you'd put in like $1 or $5 and you'd pick the players and we'd tally all the points and you'd win. I'd get like my friends' dads in it and everything.
Oh, wow.
And this is, we're talking like 1993, man, like 1994, like, so like, guys like, Troy Aikman and Steve Young, like all that, like Michael Irvin, all the fun, players that are now all going into Hall of Fame and making me feel super old. We're picking players from that. And that was kind of like how I started, like my first form of degeneratism, like collecting money. Cause we always like, me and my friends always played like poker for like change and stuff. And like for card, and then like exchanging like, football cards and baseball cards. Like we always did all that stuff. So that was kind of where I first started. And, I've just been playing fantasy football literally ever since. I was actually huge in fantasy baseball forever. And that's how I got into the inroads with fantasy football, is because, fantasy baseball was just more accepting to analytics, and there was things were more acceptable. And then when fantasy football started to let more of that in the door, I was like, ooh, I can just kind of do this for 4 months instead of, 7 months. And then because fantasy baseball is the ultimate grind, like the people that are creating fantasy baseball content and are in the streets, hats off to you. You guys are the true heroes, because fantasy baseball is a war of attrition, man.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I feel like in my fantasy baseball leagues back home, it's like if you're not a contender in like June, just like the season, throw the season away. And then, do you remember your first like fantasy draft pick? Like
actual, like in a league, I don't remember at the time like who like actually like my first pick was. I wish I could like had a recollection of that. I mean, I've drafted so many damn fantasy football teams over 40 years, man. I'm an old soul. But I don't remember the actual first pick. But I mean, like I said, I was playing in the mid 90s where, you're getting Dan Marino and
Wait, so, do you remember your first championship then? Like when like any key cogs in that lineup?
No, man, actually, like I wish I had a great memory for it. Like saying, oh, this is when I won my first fantasy championship. But I mean, I generally have like great like fantasy football playoff memories over the years, from different leagues, starting Tim Hightower in a fantasy championship. I remember streaming Sean Hill when he was in the 49ers in a fantasy championship and winning. We were joking with my father-in-law, our home league that now is on 18 years. The very first year he had Clinton Portis with the Washington Redskins at the time, and he threw a touchdown pass in the game.
Oh, wow.
And like winning a championship off of that was super cool. But like playing like you always remember like the dart throws you call. I remember starting Janelle Jernigan and like, so you remember those. You don't necessarily remember like all like the absolute like hammer games from like the behemoths. You remember like great calls you made, like starting Sei Ujiri Tudu with the Chargers. I remember him like doing things like that, like always stick out, man. For like, because those are the calls you made, and like you try to stream stuff. It's not just the anchors that got you there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then I think you're pretty much one of the foremost like kind of analysts of fantasy. I'd say like your worksheet is pretty much is up there with any other like weekly content anyone else is putting out. So if you don't mind giving us like a peek behind the curtain of your process, like what do you think is a factor that does a good job of like predicting games that maybe people underrate, whether that's game level or player level, like some predictive factor that you like to key in on?
Well, there's a lot that goes into it, and I think there's different variables for different players. Obviously, I'm taking a top-down look first at the game environment. You've got all like the worksheet opens with the table of all this team data, right? Like you've got your point spread, but you've got also yards per play stuff, how many run pass splits for each team, and we're kind of incorporating that at first, the game environment, and then we're just going through each player and just different kind of the keys to the matchup, and I think that's what stands out the most. I've definitely grown over the years too, because when I started doing that article, obviously it was at NBC, and we had Evans matchups, and having going heads up with Evans matchups like made me want to raise my game. And then, we've seen as people have, the industry's expanded, more people have gone on their own. We've had more things go behind paywalls, and like it's opened up guys like, when I left NBC at the same time Evan did, he took matchups to ETR. I took the worksheet, to Sharp Football Analysis, and it opened up a door for this void in the industry to create a free article. And Mike Tagliere, we miss you, Mike, went and did it at Fantasy Pros and started doing the same type of article. He's passed that on to Derek Brown, who's doing an excellent job. But when I see people have those articles out there and they're all doing a good job, it's a competition for me. I need to be better than those, especially if I'm someone that's, now has work behind a paywall. Listen, I'd love to have everything for free, but writing man gets paid to do writing. It is what it is. But when I see those people doing those other articles that are direct competition, I want to make it so you want to read this one versus those ones, and you want to come here. So I need to always kind of up my game, either having new stats, improving accuracy throughout the course of the season, which is something I always really harp on. But it's really good for me too. It's not just from a stance of helping other gamers. For me, like me writing up every single player every week makes me such a better podcast guest. It makes me such a better, player for prop bets. It makes me such a better when I'm betting the games. It makes me such a better fantasy players. All these avenues where it is a lot of work, but I'm really extremely grateful by the time I get through the process every week, because I have such a stronger grasp on the entire landscape, instead of just saying, like, looking at like a matchups based thing, and you're just like, well, this team's giving up this amount of points, this position, or like you see like the little red and green things, and you're setting lineups. Like, you get such a more firmer grasp of like actual environments. Like, well, this team's giving up this many points to wide receivers. Well, where are they giving up the points? Is it to the slot? Is it to the boundary? Is it vertical? Are they struggle a short passing game? If it's a team giving up points to running backs, is it because they're just in favorable game script? Like the Chiefs were like this for years, right? Like the Chiefs had like a decent run defense for a couple years, but they force teams in negative game script, and they're just giving up all these dump offs because they're playing shell coverage, and receiving running backs were really good against them, but it was kind of manipulated through game script. It wasn't like they were necessarily like bad against receiving running backs. It was largely game script induced and what structure of defenses they're running at that point of the games. So you just get like a better grasp of like all of like the areas of like where fantasy scoring is being, where the points are going and how they're getting there. And that's I feel like is one of the strengths of what I provide in the article, and then what I learned doing the article for myself.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And then you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what do you think is that next sort of cutting edge innovation, or that next big stat that people are going to key in on? Do you like a peek around the corner maybe?
Yeah, I mean, if I knew it, I'd be doing it already. But I mean, I'll say so. When I started, I had like the dreams of grandeur. I think a lot of people, when that do fantasy football analysis, like I wanted to find the skeleton key. And a lot of my initial work was trying to find like that next stat, right? And I created a lot of stats when I was new. A lot of people don't remember this, but I was like, I did fantasy points per route run first. I did it at XN Sports. I was the first person doing like route data, like per route stuff.
Okay.
And now it's like a forefront. You're getting targets per route run, all that stuff. But I started an article when Denny Carter brought me on, because Denny got me my first job at XN Sports. I did fantasy points per route run, and it was my like kind of like baby and metric. But as the years have gone on, I've stopped trying to like hunt for that skeleton key. And I think like the key, at least for me, what works for me, because different things work for different people, is taking large like chunks of data and distilling them to the public in a way that the general public wants to consume them. I think that's one of the strengths I bring, or at least I think I believe that, but I think you're taking all these data and like all these metrics, right? Because people want to hear like all these acronyms, ADOT and stuff, but like it's hard to write an article where you just have like a bunch of graphs, right? Like there's a finite audience that like is computing all that stuff and then wants to read and consume work that way. There's a lot of intelligent people that are creating work like way better than I can in that field, but the general public that's playing fantasy football still like wants to kind of like, they don't want their handheld, but they do want just like, give me the analysis, don't make me do the work. They want the analysis. And I feel like that's one of the strengths. I'm taking all this data, all these metrics, and incorporating them in a way that's like easy to consume. And then also through like the people that just like understand football, like they want to be told, like, break this down for me, like if I'm a regular football watcher, to make it make sense. And I feel like that's one of the things I bring to the table.
That makes sense. And then you've also kind of touched on this a little bit, but who are some other analysts or any other like ideas in the fantasy space that you'd say have influenced you the most?
Yeah, I mean, so many guys. I've been really blessed to find my way through a lot of the great people in this industry. I'm really grateful. Obviously guys like JJ Zacharyson, I've had a relationship with him for a decade. It's been, great to work with him side by side. He's one of my like real good friends. We bounce a lot of ideas off of each other. He's kind of my heat check guy. Like, what do you think about this idea? I'm thinking about this article. Like, where are the fallacies of this? Getting to work with, Evan and Sigmund Bloom early in my career was great. And then the Fantasy Douche, like, who's not around. I mean, do you even know Fantasy Douche?
I've only like heard the name from, talking to other, like, I think Matt Freeman was telling me about like the early RotoViz days as well.
And, I don't even know his real name. So Pete Over has actually met him in real life. I don't even know his real name. He, his ghost writing handle was Frank DuPont. But when I went and worked for RotoViz, just when you're writing an article, like, this is where you can write through the lens of like, this is where you could like you would tear down your article, right? Like, where are you wrong in your assumption? And that makes you such a better writer, and it makes you such a better fantasy player because, it gives you better conviction. It teaches you how to write better, but also how to understand like where you can get tore down, right? Like, this is where this philosophy could be wrong as well. And it just makes you a better all around everything, writer, player, all around. So I really love Frank, and I miss him just because he shaped a lot of how I write and how I approach creating content for people.
Like, he was your editor, I guess, back then?
He was everything at the time. Like, we had an actual editor of site, but that was his baby, RotoViz, which now Sean and, Curtis have taken over. But he would read everything, and he would give you just a lot of really great feedback, but he gave you feedback in a way that was so constructive. And he just had this way of telling you how wrong you were in the nicest way. But it was, because some people, you take umbrage to stuff, or you get defensive when you try to tell people. But he did it his way of just communication was so strong, and it just made everyone so much better. It was like a real steel sharpened steel, like, kind of environment there. And it was one of the best environments I had, because you look at what everyone's gone on to do there. We talked about, like, Friedman, and we had Siegel there at the time, and John Moore, and it's just like everyone kind of went through there, and we all just made each other so much better. Jonathan Bales, who obviously is not doing his own thing and stuff, but it's just so good, man, early on.
Yeah, no, I remember I probably got on the like fantasy Twitter streets in maybe 2015, and it was like all of you guys were like the sharp minds to be keying in on. And then I think that kind of segues into my next point, which is about, you're pretty much, I'd say the biggest thing you're known for, and I think you might agree with this, is like the Konami Code article, right? If there's like one really direct thing you can hit on, is that. So, I mean, do you want to summarize it in case anyone hasn't heard?
What's funny is that article just hit the 10-year anniversary. I wrote that article 10 years ago. It's really trash. Like, the actual, like, going, because it's anything you go back and read, probably, like, if you ask any musician or artist, like, they go back, like, grade your early work. I'm such a better writer than I was then, but the concept still holds true. And the merits of like what I was drilling into at the time, like, are still really sound. And you see it all in today in fantasy football. It's actually, what's really wild is when I wrote that article, it was originally about when, coming off the Tim Tebow season, and Terrell Pryor was going to start for the Raiders, and just understanding that you don't need good quarterback play for fantasy play because the way rushing was weighted at the time. Now, it's progressed in such a way where now we've got, because human evolution, we've just got better athletes playing quarterback now. And now these guys are great passers too. Like, they're giving you elite passing and rushing, and these guys are just so hard to combat. And the fantasy community knows, if you look at fantasy ADP, like, look at the guys that are getting drafted highly, right? Like, it is the Josh Allens, it's the Jalen. They understand the archetype of the player that offers a floor plus this immense ceiling if you get the elite passing season. But at the time, it was harder to run into those seasons. We had 2010 Vic, you had 2015 Cam Newton, but like, those players weren't consistently giving you those seasons throughout their career. It was like, you had this one spike season, and then Cam Newton was Cam Newton. You had Michael Vick with the 2010 season, then Michael Vick was Michael Vick. And now we're having these guys at the top that are just like, this is who they are as players. And like I said, fantasy gamers have really realized it. But what's funny is the running quarterbacks now are starting to manipulate fantasy football in a different way. And I wrote about this offseason, looking at like league-wide trends. And as running has become more prevalent through NFL offenses, as we've seen like the defensive meta shift to more too high shells, they want to prevent big plays in the passing game. Teams have started to use their mobile quarterbacks in the running game because it's, you know, natural leverage. You make the defense play 11 on 11 defense as opposed to 11 on 10 defense when your quarterback hands the ball off to running back.
Right.
And mobile quarterbacks are manipulating fantasy football now in different avenues. Running back targets have dropped now 5 years in a row. We're getting less use of running backs in the receiving game because mobile quarterbacks don't really check down as much. There's a bunch of, you know, articles and data written on that. Also, running backs now are getting less usage inside the 5 because teams are using their quarterbacks for these carries. So it's crazy to see like how mobile quarterbacks now are starting to manipulate other avenues, and it's like kind of circles back to even what I was talking about a decade ago, and to see it continue happening, because we still are only probably a third of the league still has a mobile quarterback. Like there's still no really cap of understanding where this goes. Do we eventually reach a time where 20 teams have dual threat quarterbacks, 25? Like we don't, like, we haven't really seen the cap of the ceiling of where this, like where the bubble pops and you see like maybe a dead cat bounce. We don't really know yet.
Yeah, no, I think because of like the league-wide ideas of what a quarterback is that held true for so long, that's like been very recent that you have these guys taking over. And I think that like kind of like you said, fantasy gamers have come to understand like, okay, you want Josh Allen, you want Lamar Jackson, but do you think that there's any quarterback right now who has that rushing floor ceiling combo that's maybe still kind of underrated?
I don't know. I'd say underrated because, like I said, even the gamers like understand. Like, so Justin Fields is a guy that had like a ton of questions coming into the season because you needed for his ADP where he was that passing spike that was already being priced in to happen for him to like smash. He was like the traditional Konami Code guy. Like the guys like Josh Allen or even Jalen Hurts, because like, he had such a good passing season last year. Like we're not traditional Konami guys. Like, these are guys that are actually just like dual threat fantasy assets. Last year, Justin Fields was a traditional Konami guy. Like you're getting there through the rushing floor, not really getting the passing stats. But that's why he had like a lot of really good QB1 weeks. But like he didn't really pace the position outside of like the like that 3-week stretch. He went like absolutely bonkers. And that's because you're getting like 40-yard rushing touchdowns, which aren't sustainable. And we've seen now that he hasn't had as good as rushing, and we're 2 weeks in. Like, granted, you remember he sucked the last 2 weeks of last season too, so we could see this thing turn around. But the reason you're not getting those spike weeks is you're not getting the rushing, and the rushing has been gone down. He's got 5 designed rushing attempts to 2 games. He averaged 6 per game last year, and you're not getting that passing spike, right? Like that where people were projecting, because people were like, it happened for Stephon Diggs or Josh Allen when he got Stephon Diggs. It happened for Jalen Hurts when he got AJ Brown, and we haven't seen that happen for Justin Fields yet. And then we think about like Taysom Hill when he took over for that stretch. Like he was a traditional Konami Code guy. So like the only guy that was kind of like not having it really priced in this year, I think, was Anthony Richardson, because nobody knew what kind of ceiling he had for passing, especially given his where he was as an efficiency, a lack of efficiency coming out of Florida. But he's been a lot better quarterback, and we only saw him for a quarter for 2 weeks. But the passing production for Anthony Richardson through 5 quarters of football was, I think, better than people were expecting, or at least like, I think we were expecting the worst. We were coming in saying, we know we're gonna get rushing, we'll expect the worst for passing and see where it goes. But the passing was actually a little better, I think, than people thought it was, and it was a positive sign. And, credit, I think, Shane Steichen too, because they were able to get the ball out. And I think people were optimistic about Shane Steichen getting paired with Anthony Richardson because of what he did with Jalen Hurts, but they were getting the ball out quick in the seams and on the right side of the field. Obviously it was where he was throwing the ball, but they have him, if he's going to flirt with like a 60 to 65% completion rate and not a 55% completion rate, like that's a big deal for him for fantasy football. And he doesn't have to necessarily have to throw for 4,000 yards or 30 passing touchdowns. If we get 20 to 25 passing touchdowns out of him, like that's going to be really huge for his upside.
And I mean, he had, I think, 10 carries in week 1, 3 carries through a quarter in week 2. Like the floor or the ceiling of that rushing volume has been as good as anyone could have hoped. Like, where do you think Anthony Richardson's going to be valued in redraft ADP or Dynasty among quarterbacks this time next year?
I think even if he just has the same season, like he has to be in the same area where Justin Fields was going, right? Because you at least have to account for the potential ceiling, right? Because I think when I broke them into tiers, right? Like you have this tier where I would say like you have Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, right? They're these guys that do give you a little bit of rushing. They're not complete statues anymore. And I think that's, like I said, evolution. Like, I don't know if we're going to have a lot of traditional like pocket passers, right? Like Mac Jones is like when you look at the prospects that have come out the last 3 or 4 years, Mac Jones is like really the only guy that doesn't give you any mobility.
Right.
Because even like CJ Stroud, who was a pocket passer in college, and Bryce Young was a screen, like you're getting a little rushing still out of those guys. But you had to kind of value from like a fantasy football lens of like in apex range of outcomes. Justin Fields and Lamar Jackson may not be as safe as Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow. But if everything goes right for those guys, you run into that apex outcome, they're just better fantasy football players because you're getting so much rushing. And if you have either of those guys even flirt with 30 passing touchdowns, you're getting
2019 Lamar Jackson.
Just whoosh. And like those guys, the only way for Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and Justin Herbert to compete to be the actual QB1 in fantasy football is they have to throw and flirt with 40 passing touchdowns. And that's like really hard, even for great quarterbacks, to just say like, I have to get 40 passing touchdowns out of my quarterback to maybe try to pace the position for guys that could throw 25 passing touchdowns. It's such a thin razor to walk. And we saw it with Herbert last year, just how those guys can fall apart too. Because if you don't get those 40 passing touchdowns, and hell, if you don't even get the 30 and like some things just go wrong, your offensive line gets hurt, you run into just a shitty efficiency year like Justin Herbert had last year, your wide receivers get hurt, and then like that archetype just falls apart. And so you had to even understand, like going into drafts, Justin Fields and Lamar Jackson don't have the safety of these picks. They don't. But they have this ability to have a floor through rushing, and then just this immense ceiling that these guys just can't get to unless they flirt with 40 passing. They basically have to compete to win league MVP to be the QB1, which is why it's just like a wild outcome to say like, I'm going to invest in this at ADP. When you have like this guy just has this thin razor outcomes, so he has to be perfect. He has to be a perfect player.
Yeah. So let's put it in print. Next season, redraft ADP Anthony Richardson.
I would say his ADP will be like, probably like 4th, 5th round in general public leagues, like in industry leagues. Like he'll probably be a little lower because of quarterbacks, but he would be, I would say like he'll go off the board. I would say no later than QB6, QB7.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. And now week 3, I mean, it's Saturday, so we got games tomorrow. Any underrated games, like game environments that you think the DFS public is a little bit low on right now that you're excited to play some guys from?
Well, we're about 36 hours out for the kickoffs, or not 24 hours out. So I'll have to go and check like the Ophelia storm warnings to see what we're looking. Everyone is freaking out about the East Coast storm, so I have to see exactly what we're looking at with our guys like Kevin Roth or Hillo, who I do a show with, who's got the aviation background, to see what we're looking like. But if we don't get like the weather stuff, I think one of the games that's flying under the radar, which is wild to think about, is Commanders Bills is the first one that sticks out, because we've got kind of the Bills on the main slate. And like they always come with like a high team total. They always can get the 30 points, but like they're not really projecting for like a lot of ownership in DFS this week. And you kind of have this wild card of the Commander side of like, what if Sam Howell's just kind of decent, like, or even good? We now have a 3-game sample of him, very small, but he's outkicked like his DFS cost massively in all 3 games. He's been really good. And then you have this Eric Bieniemy factor, right? Like Eric Bieniemy has worked with Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott. Leslie Frazier's no longer there, but he understands like how this defense wants to operate. And he's got a lot of experience calling games against this style of defense that Sean McDermott runs. So I'm curious what he brings to the table in this matchup. And, the Bills are a defense we respect, but, what if Sam Howell's just better than Zach Wilson? What if he's better than Jimmy Garoppolo, the 2 quarterbacks that the Bills have faced this year, and they get more pushback in this game? So that's a game I think that is very interesting. Could be a game that's like it's not even hard to argue for it, like potentially going over, right? Like I think most people listening would understand, like, yeah, that game could go over. But if that game does go over, it's going to be through Sam Howell, right? Like the way it gets there is through Sam Howell and the play of Sam Howell. So Sam Howell looks like, he's a guy like you want to maybe get some like loose exposure to, especially because this week people are looking in that price zone. They want to play CJ Stroud. I think people want to even pay down and play Gardner Minshew a little bit in those game environments. So Sam Howell's going, I think, a little overlooked because we know they're going to have to score points. And if that game's going to pop, it's going to get there through him. And we know that they've got really good weapons. So that one's fun. You're here to go to Browns Titans.
Yeah.
Is this kind of we're 8 games now into Deshaun Watson's Browns tenure, and it's not gone well. And we keep getting excuses made. But this is kind of a week where like you have to say, like, if we're going to get anything out of this Browns passing game, it's this game, right? They lose Nick Chubb. You're facing this ultimate run funnel in the Titans. If you go back to last year, I mean, they don't allow any rushing yards. And it's funny because this 3 weeks in a row, we're going to get kind of like the RB volume chalk against the Titans. You open with Jamal Williams, he flamed. You get Josh Kelly last week, he flames. People are still going to play Jerome Ford tomorrow. He's probably not going to do well. But so you have like all these factors that push themselves. Like the Browns have to get something out of this passing game tomorrow. They're not going to just line up and run the football without Nick Chubb against this Titans defense. So, obviously Amari Cooper is been the one efficiency piece that's been like kind of decent with Deshaun Watson, at least for one of the 2 games. But I think Elijah Moore, like you look at Elijah Moore, he's run a route on 89%, 85% of the team dropbacks 2 games, got 7 and 9 targets. The Tennessee Titans have allowed double-digit PPR points to 5 different wide receivers already. We played 2 games. They've allowed 16.5 or more PPR points to 4 different receivers in just 2 games. So I think Elijah Moore at his price point is a guy like you mix him into some doubles. You get unique. You gotta, I think, swallow it. I think and mix into some Deshaun Watson this week, because if it's not going to happen here, like when is it going to happen?
Right. Yeah. No. We were adjusting our dynasty rankings like the last couple of days after this week, and it's like the Deshaun Watson outlook is getting bleaker and bleaker that every week that he looks as washed as he did. And I mean, I was at the Browns last game, Monday night in Pittsburgh, and the opportunity for Elijah Moore is totally there right now. I mean, just the amount of chances he had, the air yards he's getting right now. I think I agree that he's kind of the appealing play from that game. Is there any other final notes you want to hit on for like secrets for tomorrow's DFS slate? Maybe.
Well, I mean, Nielsen, you're gonna have to get creative. Obviously, everyone's gonna be playing Chargers, Vikings, and building stacks around that. The good thing about that game is it is very hard to onslaught because of the price of all the players. I mean, if you want to stack, if you're trying to run doubles with like bringbacks, Herbert plus Keenan Allen plus Mike Williams on both sites is 40 to 45% of your salary. It doesn't give you a lot to work with. If you want to play Kirk Cousins plus Justin Jefferson plus TJ Hawkinson, you're at the same boat. I think it's roughly around 42% on both sites for just those 3 players. So you're going to have to really mixing a lot of the ancillary guys. I think we'll see a lot of people go back to Josh Kelly, which I think is good. And you're going to have to incorporate guys like Jordan Addison, right? Like Jordan Addison, I think it'll be a popular play. Even KJ Osborne is light. And then Alexander Madison, is probably the guy that's going to float through. No one really wants to play him. He's probably not a good football player, but we already seen Cam Akers probably won't be active. It's a game where the Vikings probably are going to try to run the football more. I think Brandon Staley is going to invite them to run the football more as well. We've seen the Chargers, they've been bad against the run through 2 games, but last week you play a team like the Titans, they're gonna play the run more than they will the pass. That Brandon Staley's MO with that wide 9, you want to see it all these high shell looks. We're gonna give you light boxes. We want you to run the football because your best version of running the football is worse than your worst version of throwing the football. But I think that's what's going to be the approach for that game. And we know Brian Flores is going to do the same thing. Brian Flores through 2 games they've run man coverage on 3 snaps. Yeah, through 2 games. Crazy. So he's going to do the same thing. You go back to that Thursday night game against the Eagles. Brian Flores is going to do the same thing. He's not going to let Justin Herbert beat him over the top. So you're going to get a lot of, light box looks. I think we're going to see Josh Kelly. And we saw Kellen Moore in week 1 again when Vic Fangio did that. Vic Fangio is like, hey, I'm going to do my Vic Fangio thing. We're running a lot of cover 4, a lot of cover 6. Kellen Moore was like, hey, we're going to run 30 times. I don't care. I'll call 30 runs. And I think it could be a game like that where Kellen Moore's like, hey, I'll be your Huckleberry. I'll pound the rock if you want to let me. So there's gonna be some unique ways to get around that.
Any Elijah Dotson in your lineups?
No, I don't think we're gonna get there at Elijah Dotson. I will say you got to be encouraged though by the Chargers wide receiver usage. I don't know if anyone's really gone under the hood and looked at this, but under Kellen Moore, there has been a philosophical change on how these guys are being used. Keenan Allen's getting a little bit of that CeeDee Lamb route tree right now. And you go back, his first catch of the season was, a wheel route down the sideline for 34 yards. he's running deep routes on 16% of his routes right now, 20 yards or further downfield. Last year was just 7.5%. It'd be by far the highest rate of his career. He's getting this opportunity downfield. So that's like real. We talk about the Justin Herbert 8-out stuff all off season. And then Mike Williams as default, like they're moving him around. He's played in the slot more than he has ever in his career. And you saw his target rate with no Austin Eckler. Because you remove Austin Eckler from this offense, he commands targets himself. And then where do those go? They didn't go to Josh Palmer, and Josh Kelly's not earning targets himself. So we saw Big Mike get the 13 targets, like big target share, and he's getting more efficiency smoothing targets. Like Big Mike doesn't have to be like an exclusive slot player, but when you take a player that only won downfield and he only won in man coverage situations, you get him in this position to now get more efficiency boosting targets. It removes some of the volatility like a player like Big Mike had, right? And we've seen like the struggle, like this in Cincinnati with T. Higgins, right? Like T. Higgins has become a really volatile fantasy player because he doesn't get those efficiency smoothing targets.
Right.
He's getting
those like 10-yard targets in the slot where like you can almost bank like a few fantasy points like every game for those guys. But yeah, like you said, Higgins, most of the time, Mike Williams haven't been getting that kind of usage. So
it's really positive to see the usage for the Chargers wide receivers. I think big picture, you got to feel good about having both of those guys right now. We'll see, when Eckler comes back, and it looks like he might not even come back to week 6 because they have a week 5 bye. So Big Mike might have a nice little early season run out because Josh Palmer is still playing above their slow burning Quentin Johnston, and like no one else are target earners in that offense.
Yeah. And then another thing I like to do with this show is kind of give people a look behind the curtain at, who your favorite fantasy analysts are when they're not thinking about football, which is very few hours of the week this time of year, admittedly. But Matt wanted me to ask you how your flag football career is going.
I mean, it's gone, man. It's dead. But I did get to go last year to nationals in January. I had a pick that tweeted. I wish we had prep here, for producer pop this up. But I did get to go and play 35 and older. We won nationals, but I think that was the swan song for I think a lot of us winning nationals at our age at this point. 'Cause I'm 41 at this point. Was basically it.
I mean, that's pretty crazy though, Nash. Like, I mean, you can say you're a fantasy for flag football national champion.
I did play at the Expo, which just doesn't really count, man. Like that doesn't really count. That's not really us playing or doing anything. It's literally a couple plays us running around. It's loose exercise. But for years we played. I played up until full time. I played until I was 35 years old. We had a buddy break his neck, unfortunately. Yeah, and that was kind of like put us off. It's like, dude, we're 35. Like a lot of people are just like, I have to go to work tomorrow. Like, I can't tell my boss like I'm getting hurt playing flag football at 35. That's before I was full time doing fantasy football at the time too. It's like I just can't tell my boss like I'm getting hurt at my age, like a weekend warring, like this shit. So it's like, but when he broke his neck, it was kind of like a lot of people kind of went to retirement. I got called back out. I kind of missed it for years too. And they were like, "Do you want to play? We're gonna do 35 and older this year." I said, "All right." I was like, I'm gonna come out, and that's winning. My oldest son with me. He had a blast. Us winning, and it was great. But we traveled forever. We were nationally ranked for years. We were one of the best teams in Ohio for a long time. It was great, man. I miss it. I miss playing sports. Like that's how I grew up. I grew up playing sports. It was how I got exercise, and that's when I started gaining weight. It's when I stopped playing softball. When I stopped playing football, I had to get back. It's like I have to really exercise now, and really exercising sucks, man.
Yeah,
it's not fun.
Yeah, no, I played soccer in high school, and that kept me in the best shape of my life. And I feel like ever since I stopped, it's definitely a struggle. And then you also mentioned that you and I guess I presume you're going with your kids are going to a video game convention later today. So tell us about your video game hobbies. Anything in particular you like to play, or just? I
mean, a lot of people know for the years that follow me, I'm a full nerd. Like I do this. It's not just fantasy football nerd. Like I am the nerdiest of nerds. I do it all. We're huge into tabletop gaming. I've been a tabletop gamer for years. I'm huge in video games. Obviously, I grew up playing video games, so I still play video games today. I get to play with my kids, which is really cool. Love that. And my kids are better than me at a lot of games too now. The youngest one beat me in Mario Kart, and I was like, oh my God, I'm done. I'm toast, man. Like I can't even whoop on these kids anymore. But so we're going to the gaming convention. The Cleveland gaming convention today, which is really cool. So we're going to see some vintage stuff, get some product, be around a lot of fellow nerds. But I'm into all that stuff, man.
What's your number one game all time?
I mean, number one game all time is tough because there's so many great games I've played over the years. I will say, like, games I've beaten like a lot and played a lot. I mean, the original Last of Us, and seeing the show come out and them do that right, thumbs up to that. But I got my son, he played through the two Last of Us 2 and really enjoyed it, so he wanted to watch the show. Played that a ton. Final Fantasy 7, the original Final Fantasy 7 is great. Link to the Past, old Nintendo. Got to hook that up too. Love that. And the Mass Effect series is great, man. I love the Mass Effect series. I'll play it, but I'd play so many games over the years, and I will continue to play games. I don't get as much time because of the work schedule. I'm trying to get through Final Fantasy 16 now before Spider-Man 2 comes out in the next few weeks, but I only really get to play on the weekends at this point during football season because I'm spending so much time, again, first world problems. I understand. You get to write out fantasy football. Sorry for you, but I don't get the game as much during the season.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, what are like some things that I should see while I'm here in your area in Ohio? Like, or what are the top attractions that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, Cleveland has really changed over my, tenure here. It was, I think a lot of the faux big cities have really kind of, we were talking about Pittsburgh, and you're in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's one of those same cities that over the last decade has really changed. It's gotten a lot nicer. And I think what really kind of boosted a lot of these cities up was like food and beer culture, right? Like, people no longer, when they traveled, like, they wanted to go eat, like, where can I eat locally, right? They're watching diners, drives and dives, and like trying to see like, where can I eat that I wouldn't find like off the beaten path.
Mm-hmm.
And like, obviously a lot of people have want to go get like local beers. Like, local beers became like a big thing for American travel story. You see at the expo, like, people like do the beer exchanges. Bring me beer where you come from, and we'll exchange these beers. And I think a lot of those cities like got a boost from that, like food and beer culture got like a huge boost that, and it really improved that years. We had a casino built like 5 years ago, so like everything's kind of improved. LeBron brought a lot of economy to Cleveland. It really boosted the downtown area. But we have the Rock Hall downtown. Like I said, the casinos down there. The downtown's a lot nicer. We've got some Michael Simon restaurants you can go visit downtown. Butcher and Brew is my favorite place. Not a Michael Simon restaurant, but we've got like a West 25th Street if you're in that area. Like, they've got a great like food market that's amazing. Shout out to Steve's Euros if you can go down there. Obviously, that was on Man vs. Food. He went to Steve's Euros, so it's a really hot spot. If you come down there, they put hot sauce in the tzatziki. It's like
that sounds so
good. So the tzatziki's with the hot sauce. That's one of my favorites. But this Midwest, so there's lots of beer, lots of food to eat and drink up here.
Yeah. What's like? Is there any particular regional food like only in Cleveland or only in Ohio that I should like make sure I try before I continue on my road trip?
People may take offense. I think it's more of like a melting pot. We have a lot more, like, obviously, because if you do like Michael Simon stuff, you're getting more like Mediterranean, like you're doing like the pierogies, you're doing like I said, that Mediterranean stuff. But the area I'm in, where you're visiting me, like in a suburb, we're right near one of the original steel mills in America that was here. So we've got a lot of really good like Puerto Rican and Mexican food too, as well, from like a lot of where like a lot of immigration was here because it's where the jobs were at the time. So like, we've got a really great underrated, like I said, you can get some real good Mexican and Puerto Rican food in my area.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really good. And then what's like, if I could ask you for one book recommendation? I've been listening to a bunch of audio books now. I'm doing all this driving. Like, is there one book you'd recommend that has kind of like changed the way you think about any one thing in particular?
So I mean, you probably got like a lot of better like highbrow answers from like people that you visited so far. I am more of a fiction reader, and when I do nonfiction, I like to read more either like documentary stuff or like stuff that's happened. So like so some great like nonfiction stuff you want to read. Can I Keep My Jersey by Paul Shirley. Is a great read. He was like this hanger-on in the NBA and played in like the European leagues and stuff. He's got just like great stories of like his journey being like not being like a great like being like a fringe athlete, and like, so really cool. If you want to read that, obviously probably like read like Bringing Down the House or something like that. Bringing Down the House, they made a really crappy movie version of it. 21. But then fiction. I grew up, my mom was a huge Stephen King fan. So like, I remember one of the first books I read was Cujo, and it like opened me up to like she would read a Stephen King, then I would read it. She would clear it like at the time, like as a safe enough for him to read. But like, my item's cool enough to have cool parents that let me watch like movies I shouldn't have been watching, like books. So like, it was cool. So I read a lot of those books when I was younger, and I was huge into I know you're not much of a comic guy. I grew up on comics, like I said, full nerd. I just read through like the entire Invincible series. Cool. Season 2 is coming out for that. I read through like the entire the omnibus of those. So that was really cool. I really enjoyed that as well. It's a Robert Kirkman who did Walking Dead, the comic as well. He did that same series. So I really enjoyed that as well. And like I said, full nerd. People probably gave you some great answers of like they were reading like philosophers and stuff like that. I'm listen, man. I'm too stuck in my ways. I want to read fun stuff.
Yeah, no, that's good to have a good blend. Like I've gotten some football recommendations, some more serious stuff. I've been listening to like a good bit of science fiction, so all over the place.
I think I have Can I Keep in Jersey? I'll let you take it on the road. Because even if you don't like basketball, it's just great to like hear like a perspective of like a dude that just like tried to like hang on as an athlete. Mm-hmm. And then like the stories he has, like being around like dudes like Dennis Rodman and like stuff like that. It's really cool because he was on some of those Bulls teams like as a hanger on, like a practice squad guy. It's very cool book though.
Yeah, no, that sounds sick. And then, all right, I'm gonna close this out. What's your like number one football memory that you have? Is there like one game in particular or one moment that really stands out to you?
I have a lot of fun ones. So I grew up a 49ers fan. I didn't have, I told the story, I just told it again with Pete and those guys, but I didn't have like a huge like football influence from like my dad of like, he wasn't like a hardcore Browns dude. So I never got like pushed on me like we root for the Browns in this house, like we love it. So I never had that on me. So I would watch the Browns at 1, and we're talking like late 80s, and they ran for 4 yards a play. And then at 4 o'clock, Madden Summerall would always be the Fox game. And it was typically every week was the 49ers. And they were just playing a different game of football than everyone else. And it was easy to fall in love with. And you can say, hey, you became a front runner, whatever. But I grew up a 49ers fan like that because it was, like I said, I made the analogy. It was like losing your football virginity to Rachel McAdams. Like it was like I was broke. Listen, man, it was sex. It was like I exposed to sex early. It was too good. I was going to turn it down. But I remember I was a huge Jerry Rice fan. Jerry Rice is my guy. Like I wanted to be a wide receiver, all these things. And I remember when Jerry Rice was going to break Jim Brown's touchdown record, I was at my buddy's house and he needed 3 touchdowns to break it. And they played the Raiders opening night on Monday night. And I said, he's going to break it. He's going to get all 3 tonight. And I remember, him getting that. He had 2 early, and then he kind of caught this touchdown where Steve Young just threw it up, kind of like double coverage. He makes this great catch over Albert Lewis, who was a safety for the Raiders at the time. And I have a plaque of it and everything. But I just remember like that, just feeling so good because it was like my favorite player, and he cemented like his historical legacy of broke the all-time touchdown record at the time. It's crazy. He ended up scoring 200 touchdowns. I don't know if that will ever be broken. I don't know if that will ever be broken.
All those stats where it's like if you look at any receiving stat over the age of like 35 or 38, it's like it's all Jerry Rice and all it's mind-boggling. I mean, and I'm someone who I don't have any memories of watching him, but just seeing his name at the top of every record book is absolutely crazy.
It's crazy looking back at him becoming an adult. Cause like adult version of Jerry's like not the coolest dude. Like, he's done like a lot of weird promotion stuff, and he's selling like copper bracelets and shit. And I'm like, come on, Jerry. Like, what are we doing, man?
Did you see that Julian Edelman was like talking on some podcast about how he took Jerry Rice's daughter to prom? That was a crazy story.
Yeah, it was great. And Edelman, it's funny. Like I imagine like just like going in because he said like he would like go like play like in his office, like take like touch all his shit and do everything. How cool is that, man?
Yeah,
what a cool story.
And then to have that kid grow up and become Julian Edelman, like what are the odds too?
Right. Yeah. That Edelman podcast is interesting. So Edelman's a guy that had like a unique like. He talked about this draft process coming through because no one knew what position he was going to be. He talked about like getting worked out at running back and cornerback and doing all these things, like just a really cool, like unique player. Cause he played here at Kent State, and he talked about coming to Ohio from California, coming to Ohio and playing college football, and like the culture shock was he's here. But the Kelseys are from like 20 minutes from here.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, Rich, thanks so much for joining me. Do you want to give a chance? Let the people know where they can find you, your work during the season.
Yeah, listen, at Lord Reeves on Twitter. I'm sure you guys know that, but Sharp Football Analysis, we're grinding the worksheet. I'm excited because as the season only progresses, I only get better at this. It's the kind of the approach that I take. And shout out to you. I think that what you're doing is super cool and super fun. I told you, I was like, I'm not necessarily jealous of what you're doing because at this stage of my life, I don't think I would want to do that today. But I think at your age and where you're doing, I think it's so cool. I hope this picks up some steam and like, some outlet kind of follows what you're doing and someone could do kind of a story on this because I think it's super cool, man.
Thanks. Yeah. And yeah, it's just been awesome to meet. Like, I think that taking that sort of like expo camaraderie of the fantasy community and having these little in-person interactions whenever possible has been definitely a highlight of the trip for me so far. So thanks
from my dining room.
Yeah. Shout out to the Reeves household. And with that, thank you. See you guys all on the next episode of Fantasy Football Across America.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.